Welcome to UnHypnotized. I'm thrilled to announce our official sponsor, QuickBit Crypto Boutique. QuickBit is a Bitcoin first company specializing in hardware wallets, seed storage, education, and all things Bitcoin. I know a lot of you are concerned about the safety and security of self custody, as you should be. So, when buying a hardware wallet, it's important to buy from a manufacturer or an authorized reseller. When purchasing through Amazon, eBay, or other marketplaces, you can't always be sure who's handling your product. QuickBit is listed on the manufacturer's websites as an authorized reseller, and they handle the product directly and ship it in a verifiable, tamper proof bag. QuickBit's also owned by my good friend Dale, who actually orange pilled me, and he's a wonderful person to do business with. I highly recommend checking them out. These are real Bitcoiners running a real business. Welcome to another episode of UnHypnotized. Today, as you can tell by this big smile on my face, we have an exceptional guest, Tomer Strolight, author of Why Bitcoin and many, 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 many other essays, and is a wonderful person for us to come onto our show to speak about these themes of spirituality, consciousness, mind, and Bitcoin. Welcome, Tomer, to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. Looking forward to this discussion. Let's dive in.
Yeah, I'm excited too. There's so many topics that you approach Bitcoin in your writing and in your speaking. And what's something that you've been particularly fond of speaking about Bitcoin these days?
Well, I think Bitcoin goes through these waves and cycles of people focusing a lot on its price and then forgetting that it exists and thinking it'll disappear. But there's another aspect to it, or there's many other aspects to it, which are really spiritual in nature. They're about what freedom is and who you are and living up to your fullest potential. And people don't realize when they hear about Bitcoin, they think it's a piece of software, they think it's some kind of monetary scam or maybe a legitimate way to get rich. But it's really, it goes much deeper than that. We live in a civilization that has a broken money, which many Bitcoiners will point out, and that distorts our view of the world. We end up running on a treadmill of trying to make money that it loses its purchasing power, and we work our whole lives only to find ourselves getting poorer and poorer as we do our best. And so we end up focused on making money and trying to invest it and survive with it. And Bitcoin frees people from that whole thing. We can get into it, or we don't have to get into it in too much detail. But once you're freed from the treadmill of the rat race, what do you do with yourself then? For some people, that's an easy answer. For other people who run on that treadmill for much of their lives and been raised to run on that treadmill, they know no other life. And so the opportunity to discover your true self and actualize your true self is something that Bitcoin makes possible for a lot of people after time. And this is not a snap your fingers exercise by any stretch. It's a lifelong exercise of discovering yourself. But it's you're on a winning path rather than just on a treadmill where you're actually going nowhere, despite exerting a lot of energy with the civilization that we've all been raised in.
Yeah, definitely. I find it interesting because I started thinking about Bitcoin as a modality, just like hypnosis or ayahuasca or meditation. And for me, I found that consciousness and that expansion and that like aligning with my life's purpose and work before I found Bitcoin through potentially other modalities. But I think also Bitcoin is a modality in itself that people can use to access or, take that path for higher consciousness and expansive and finding purpose in their life.
Yeah. Yeah, I Bitcoin exists certainly outside the modality of everything that we consider finance today, and much of what we consider civilization even today. It's like it doesn't have a leader. You don't hold elections. There's no campaigning for leadership. Its rules aren't made and adjusted by people who run it. Nobody runs it. Nobody's employed by it. It's like a force of nature, and we know when it came into existence. But the more you understand it, the more you realize, well, it's going to be here for forever, for everyone on Earth, everywhere. So it's bigger than countries. It's bigger than nations. It's bigger than the most powerful entities in the world. It's indestructible. It's unstoppable. And so it gives you something to hold on to yourself that gives you unstoppability and indestructibility within context, right? It doesn't make you immortal or impervious to bullets, but it gives you something you can hold on to that is immortal and impervious to bullets. And when you have that thing, and that's your ability to exchange your energy for somebody else's energy, that is an incredible power that takes you out of the prison of, well, there's leaders who pass laws, who regulate you, who tell you what to do, who take your income, who do this, who there's all these people who are interfering with your life in all sorts of ways, not because you've done anything bad, but because they're meddling in your life because they think that's their job to do. And Bitcoin doesn't meddle with your life. Bitcoin frees you from being meddled with and lets you mind your own business and pursue your own path. And so it's an incredibly freeing modality, if you will. And it fits together with so many other of these modalities that are outside the norm of people telling you what to do and how to do it. And it tells you I'm not telling you what to do, right? Now do the most that you can with what you've got.
Oh, wait. I thought I was watching like a commercial about Bitcoin for a second. I'm like, wow, sounds great. Where do I sign up?
Right.
And there's just so many awesome things about Bitcoin that when you just start talking about what it is, it's just almost sounds too good to be true.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people see it like that, just like they might see even the possibilities of like freeing themselves from inner anxiety or from a health problem. And
Yeah.
I think whenever we start to talk about like something that is a solution, one of the beauties of it is it starts to open people's minds to like the possibility
Yeah.
of freedom,
Yeah.
of health, of wellness,
Yeah. I think people accept all these constraints that exist as though they're a given and they're a certainty, and they become cynical about the universe because they say, well, we live in a universe where I have to go to school when I turn 6 years old, and I have to learn exactly what the Ministry of Education or the Department of Education says I need to learn at 6 and 7 and 8. And by the time you're not a kid anymore, you're already in this world where somebody else has decided the course of so much of your life for you and how to schedule your days and all this stuff. And then you go to a job, which is 9 to 5, and it tells you what to do. And Bitcoin really takes us out of that and says, there doesn't have to be anybody in charge. You can explore this route on your own. And so I think that's its transformative power. And when you live in a universe that isn't constraining you with the rules other people made, but just has, the laws of nature, there's a lot more degrees of freedom that you can explore. And that gives a lot of people hope. And so I think this is where that expression that Bitcoin is hope really comes from, because it breaks you free of all these chains that constrain you. It's the chain of freedom, right? This blockchain. What does it mean? It doesn't tie you down. It lets you have free.
Yeah. I always say you don't see to believe, you believe to see.
Okay, and what do you mean by that?
Because most people, they'll say, show me the proof or show me the evidence.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I'll believe.
Yeah.
But really, once you believe, you start to see. And then there's little bits of evidence that make it easier to believe, because now what you thought was maybe possible is starting to show up in your like concrete physical reality as a possibility. And
there's a journey, right? And Bitcoin is this interesting journey. Bitcoin first presents itself to many people as a get rich quick scheme. It's you buy Bitcoin and it's going to go up in value and you're going to get rich. And so you're living in this world where everybody wants to get rich quick. And it's like, okay, well, I'm going to explore this. But the more time you spend in Bitcoin, and it's particularly to your idea, if you surrender into certain aspects of it and give it some faith, you are then able to go deeper into it and study it more. And Bitcoin doesn't ask for a lot of faith. But one of the mottos of Bitcoin is don't trust, verify, right? Don't have faith, prove it to yourself. But it's a very wide field. There's so many aspects to Bitcoin. how it works, what its rules are, the math behind it. There's physics involved, there's energy consumption, there's a lot to learn. And so if you want to learn, you have to take some of these givens on faith at first, and then spend the time to develop the understanding and thereby the certainty and the conviction that comes with it. And so studying Bitcoin and you first come in to get rich quick, and then you've got these things, these Bitcoins, and you're like, well, people say there's only 21 million. How does that work? And you end up having to learn a little bit of math and a little bit of cryptography potentially, and a little bit about distributed systems and a little bit about physics. And so you're learning because you're curious, you want to protect your money, and you're realizing more and more my money is protected in this system. And so the more you expand your knowledge, the more confidence and certainty that you get, and the more comfortable you get, right? Because when you're certain you're certain the sun's going to rise tomorrow, in part because you've seen it rise every single day of your life, but also in part because there's a scientific explanation of why it's not actually rising. The earth is spinning, and so relative to us, it goes around us once every day, but it's really us just spinning around. And once you develop the scientific understanding, you get this conviction, and nobody's going to steal your Bitcoin. Nobody's going to inflate the supply. Nobody's going to be able to do anything to you and nobody's going to be able to break any of the promises that the system makes, which is a very simple system that says nobody can spend their money twice, and anyone who has money is permitted to spend it however they want, and only 21 million of these things will ever exist. So it's really empowering to go down this path that educates you and makes you smarter in the process and connects you with other people who share those values. And then, so I wrote one article a few years ago called "Rich or Poor Bitcoiners Have What Money Can't Buy." And it was speaking about this process. It's like when you start to study Bitcoin, you end up, like I was saying, money can buy you certain things, but there are many things it can't buy you. It can't buy you integrity. It can't buy you intelligence. It can't buy you love. It can't buy you friendships. You can't go into a
Oh yeah, I was reading that the other day.
And
Yeah.
the more that you study Bitcoin, the smarter you get, the more integrity you develop, because it's a system of integrity. You meet these people who have integrity, and you form friendships with them. You maybe even fall in love with one or several of them. And so whether you're rich or poor financially, at the end of the day, the process of becoming a Bitcoiner, of having the courage to put your money where your mouth is and protecting it and all this kind of stuff, that makes you a person who has honor, integrity, friendship, love, intelligence, which are these things that money can't buy. And so this is, it presents itself as a get rich quick scheme, but slowly changes you, or at whatever pace you're prepared to tackle it, changes you into a better person and a person that has followed their own course in learning it, right? There isn't a curriculum that the government mandates. It says, on day one, you'll learn this aspect of Bitcoin. On day two, you'll learn that. It's like, it's a free for all. How you learn is how you explore the jungle of information that's out there.
Yeah, there was something, I think it was in your book, Why Bitcoin, that I was reading about you talking how as you go down that journey of Bitcoin, you start to unravel the beliefs that you've had, that are changing once you learn more.
Yeah.
And that's kind of part of that whole belief to see, but it's also very fundamental to people accepting something new, a new idea, even a solution that could help them feel better.
Yeah.
It's really fundamental to anyone to accept anything. I like to think a lot about orange pilling, and like I've been writing about how to orange pill like a hypnotist.
Okay.
And just this idea of, there's a subtraction method to helping to intaking information, because as soon as we let things fall away and we realize, oh, that thought about money, or like that trust that I just blindly had in the banks, was a belief that I took on without even realizing.
Mhm.
And sure, sometimes something happens where the bank actively does something, like you can't send an e-transfer or take out money without telling them why you want to use your own money. There's things that happen.
I went into a bank today to take out some US dollars, and they said, the head teller's at lunch. I can't help you.
Exactly.
It's like, well, one person's at lunch and I can't access my money.
Your own.
That's the way it is. Got out after lunch. The Bitcoin's open 24/7, 360. At lunch, the bank hours that it was open even, but
Yeah, that's a
Right, right,
perfect
taking it slow.
example because then some things happen and, that's what I've been speaking to is, like, connecting it to something that's actually happening to the person where they don't necessarily make the connection, "Oh, Bitcoin fixes this," and we can make that for them. But I think that's why it's also growing so much in awareness because people are seeing more and more
Mhm.
the way that, say, the banks or the system or the government or their healthcare or whatever it is, isn't really supporting their well-being. And as those beliefs start to strip away,
Yeah.
that's the awakening. And I really want to ask you this because it's the sentence that you wrote that made me reach out to you,
Okay.
which is Bitcoin is consciousness.
Did I say that? Where did I
You
say
did, I swear, like, it was in a tweet because I know we could say is, like, something about consciousness or,
that?
opens us to consciousness, but I swear I saw it, and I will find it and send it to you, but
Okay.
Bitcoin is consciousness, and I've been, like, just
Mm.
going
I
in on
once wrote a paper called How Bitcoin is Like a Giant Cybernetic Metabrain. And in that paper, I tried to demonstrate how Bitcoin has consciousness, not necessarily is consciousness, but it is conscious. And it's a bit of a lengthy paper, but it paints the picture of, well, our brains, like, we have consciousness. I'm conscious, you're conscious, and we recognize that consciousness comes somewhere around the brain, right? There's these fungi. We have, the brain is made up of these cells called neurons, and what they actually are, they form a network where each neuron connects to other networks and receives connections from other networks. And I said, this is exactly how social networks work as well, right? Like, you have people who follow you, they receive messages from you, and you have people you follow, you receive messages from them. And the way that the brain works is it's just this constant network of neurons firing messages to each other, and there's all sorts of stuff going on in there, right? It's not one, there isn't one master neuron. It's a completely decentralized system, your brain. I can take any one neuron or any 10 neurons out of your brain. You don't disappear as a person, any 10, right? Any 100, any 1,000 of them. There's trillions of them, if I recall correctly, and them constantly firing off and doing things produces this electric field, or this field of consciousness, which is itself not a central thing. It's like it's hard to focus on one thought at a time because you've got all this activity going on all over the place with new ideas jumping in. And anyone who's ever tried to meditate knows the hardest thing about meditation is just to focus on your breath for 10 seconds without new thoughts bouncing in and coming up and going on. And that's what we call our consciousness, right? And the same phenomenon is happening. And I think just one other point I make in that article is every neuron shares the exact same DNA, right? They're all in sync on the DNA, except for some that are mutated. And Bitcoin structure, when you invoke people into it, is very similar. Everybody runs a node, which is like the DNA. It has the identical blockchain, the identical code in it, all reproducing, all staying in perfect sync. But each person reaches out and communicates differently. And when Bitcoin confronts a problem, like this past week, Google released a paper saying that they have made a big advancement in quantum computing, which could threaten the cryptography and security of Bitcoin. And Bitcoiners all over, right, like neurons in a brain, jumped into action. And some said, well, we need to take action and do something. Some said, this paper is exaggerated. Here's why it's exaggerated. Some with more expertise in an area pointed this out. And eventually you get to this idea, this settlement on an idea. Well, here's how our approach should be. And if you don't, that's also okay. That's Bitcoin being uncertain about exactly how to tackle a problem, but knowing that it has several paths to go by to tackle the problem. And in fact, processing all of those simultaneously, because some people go down one path and others go down the other. And they're all focused on the survival of Bitcoin, just like every neuron in your brain is ultimately focused on your survival, right? There aren't unless there's some serious defect in your psyche, you're generally pursuing your survival and your well-being, right? And so that is an artificial form of consciousness, right? And we've seen Bitcoin adapt and evolve to all of these challenges that have been thrown before it, and it grows as a living entity. It ends up being able to consume more energy, which makes it safer and more secure. That's how its security works. It has more neurons, making it smarter and more resilient to the death of some neurons. If the individuals are neurons, like the Bitcoin community keeps growing. And so that's one way. I don't know if that's exactly what the context of the tweet is.
I mean, I don't know if it was so deep, sometimes we just say things that come to our mind. But I went down it a little bit too, and just like you were saying, the interconnectedness
Yes.
of Bitcoin being like really immutable and, representing really humanity's shift towards greater awareness, challenging outdated systems. Like this is happening, like humanity is evolving, whether people want to come along for the ride or not.
But ultimately, everyone's going to come along for this ride, right? There are latecomers and there are innovators, and we'll all meet at the final destination. And some people will get different benefits from joining at different points in time. But this is if you can't ultimately, and I think we're seeing this in today's age of Bitcoin. There's a lot of people saying, if you can't beat them, join them. And I tried to I tried to resist Bitcoin, but I realized it can't be resisted anymore. It's irresistible.
Irresistible.
It's growing and growing and growing, and everyone's accepting it. And so standing at the sidelines and saying this thing isn't real, this thing doesn't work, it just makes you look like a quack or a crank at this point, because it does work and it does exist, and it's a huge improvement over everything else we've ever used before for money. It's essentially perfected an engineered, perfected form of money with all of the attributes of money perfectly engineered, rather than finding some substance in nature like gold that has some of the aspects of money reasonably good. And so we'll make do in the same way that before we had hammers, people would make do with stones to bang on things if they needed to bang on something. But once we invented the hammer, the stone looks like
primitive.
Yeah, it looks primitive. And it's the same thing. Gold looks primitive compared to Bitcoin. And the money system that we have right now is a money system that has failed us terribly through inflation and seizure and all kinds of issues that have really corrupted the human experience. Right? Like, and we don't. So many of us don't even know what the full human experience is, because we're only raised within this fiat system. So unless you study history and look at what the remnants of history that aren't ruins yet, but are still there, you can see, wow, the human experience used to be so much more fulfilling in this regard, in that regard, and so much freer in so many regards. So while we have all these benefits of industrialization and technology, something else has gone wrong that's restricting us and chaining us and telling us what not to do left, right, and center, and so many laws and so many taxes and so many constraints on everything. What happened? And what happened is the power structures of society took over and tried to form us into what suits the power structures, right? Those 12 years of education from the time you're a child are actually a form of indoctrination, right? They tell you how to be and how to be good in the context of preserving the existing power structures. And so we end up with psychopaths in power who once these systems were established, I think we've ended up with people in power who see the vulnerabilities that it's created in the mass population, and who then seek power to take advantage of those vulnerabilities. And the consequence isn't that we've been able to push back and remove corruption from the government. The consequence is somebody invented Bitcoin that those powerful people can't control. And we as civilization are moving towards Bitcoin, rather than we're figuring out a way to fix the government, to make the government less corrupt, right? We just can't do that anymore. It's like it used to be, people behaved according to what words were written in pieces of paper as a constitution. And now they realize we just break the rules and get away with it because we forgive ourselves. We pardon ourselves from the crimes that we've committed, and off we go, or we think.
Yeah, you can't fix the system inside of the system.
Yeah, so that's how the system has become broken, and people have become very cynical. But like, that doesn't mean that the universe is malevolent. It doesn't mean that the world is broken. It just means that system is broken, and we need to replace it with an unbreakable system. And this is the genius of the Bitcoin invention. It is an unbreakable, inmalleable system. It uses mathematics, energy, physics, and cryptography to achieve this, which is an invention the likes of which we haven't really seen before in all of human history. So we first have to digest that it actually exists and
Yeah.
how it actually works, and then start applying it and using it. But it is a savior in many regards from the collapse of systems that have reached the end of life.
Yeah, I loved talking to Eric Kaysen about Satoshi as a prophet.
Mm.
And even looking at that exactly, it's not, I think that's why people think of it as hope, because uh it's not looking at things, even if something is broken, I mean, things have to fall apart and rebuilt again. That is the essence of rebirth.
Sure.
That is the essence of transformation.
Yeah.
And so if Bitcoin is transformation, then would you say that Bitcoin is helping heal the world and heal people?
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. I know, Bitcoiners have this expression, fix the money, fix the world. And I made a film a few years ago called Bitcoin is Generational Wealth,
Mm.
which talked about the problems of the past and pointed out that they were recurring, and then projected into the future about how Bitcoin fixes all these things. And it was a controversial movie because a lot of Bitcoiners said it brought tears to their eyes and reminded them of why they're here and what they're working for. And people who hadn't studied Bitcoin or weren't interested in it were like, how can you predict such a optimistic future world? Like, who are you to say that this is going to happen? And I'm happy to say that, like, 3 years in, this movie has really stood the test of time, right? It's really held up. So I'm delighted by that. But for me, it was just surrendering into the potentiality of, in a world where you don't have bankers financializing real estate and turning it into an investment rather than its purpose, which is for people to have residences. If you don't have governments controlling the education and the food and all these other things, you get to more freedom and more self-determination and self-experimentation, so that people know what works for them, and that will lead to a better world, I said. So I really believe that Bitcoin is healing us from everything. That's like, some things are forever and some things have their time, and are, and they're useful when they're useful, but then they pass their useful life and it's time to let them go. And I think we're at that point in history. There's a lot of things that, when you look at how they were 100 years ago or 50 years ago, they were functioning, but today they're dysfunctional. Something's corrupted within them. They've broken somehow, and you can't fix them. It's it's the same as with our bodies. We age, things go wrong, we die. And if we keep putting the old people whose brains are no longer functioning, whose bodies are no longer functioning, at the head of our society, we end up with a society that's got dementia. And we've actually experienced that, right, in the last 4 years, 10 years, however long you want to extend that picture to. And so these things have served their purpose and their time has come. They need to be replaced by something else, right? Nature abhors a vacuum, and people get worried about chaos. And I think that that's where Bitcoin brings an ordered chaos, right? It doesn't tell everybody what to do, but it does establish rules around one of the most important things we have in civilization, which is money, and establishes very just rules. You can't steal it. Like, finally, money that can't be stolen, and can't be stolen through counterfeiting, through inflation, through outright, direct theft. And that's really powerful. And I think that if you fix half of every transaction in the world, right, as an exchange of something for money, you fixed a hell of a lot of what's going on in the world.
And I think what you said is really important to highlight too, which is, I'm going to say it like this: sanity and insanity.
Sure.
Like, someone of a sane mind isn't being just controlled by their fear, or isn't just making decisions reactionary, but having the, I want to say ability, but maybe even just having the space to even find sanity. And I think of Bitcoin as sanity,
Mm-hmm.
because everything else just looks insane compared to it, because it's so perfect.
Yeah.
Just like peace of mind, or even just the understanding of how your mind works. A lot of insanity happens from people believing the feeling of their thinking. And the problem with that is, if they're believing the feeling of their thinking, they're likely, and especially if they're taking in thoughts of fear,
Yeah.
or like you said, people in powerful positions or in persuasive positions,
Yeah.
creating anxiety, fear, a fear of the future,
Yeah.
making people think the world is bad when the world is so good.
Yes. Yeah. I think
And
that
there's so
people.
many great solutions. And I
Yeah.
think that's why, even as Bitcoiners, we're happier, we're healthier because we're more sane.
Yeah. Well, and we're hopeful, right? And
Yeah.
and we're rationally hopeful, right? It isn't this. It isn't rose-colored glasses that we're wearing and we're seeing terrible things, but seeing something beautiful there where there isn't something beautiful. Bitcoin's freeing us from all these terrible constraints in civilization to see the beauty that's out there and the potential that's out there and the hope that's out there. And I think that's why Bitcoiners are dreamers. Bitcoiners have this belief that they can do almost anything over time and with hard work and dedication to reason. And and that is true. That is the potentiality of the human species. We possess reason and we can reorganize the constituents of the world around us to be better things, and we can engineer things. And so we have this now engineered money that allows us freedom from insanity, right? It's always a sane, incorruptible system. And then so it allows us to keep returning back to it when we feel we're losing our minds and say, okay, this is sane. Because everywhere else in our civilization, unfortunately, the insanity has crept into a point where it's really hard. You look at the education system and you see it as an indoctrination system. You look at the nutrition system and you see it as bad food system. You look at the healthcare system and you see it as a system that is trying to make you sick perpetually so it can make you a permanent customer of it. Like, these are all insane perversions of what these things ought to be. And so you need something that you can go back to that can't be perverted, that can't be corrupted. And from there you can, that's your foundation. And then you can rebuild and reconstruct food, education, healthcare, housing, finance, all of these things on something that is sane, that's sound.
Exactly.
And then when you're building on a sound foundation, you end up building something that's less corruptible. That's not to say we won't make mistakes, we won't have failures along the way, but it's to say we're not going over the edge of the cliff with no hope of return.
Yeah, and it's not about perfection, it's about intention. It's about intention and integrity.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's sane.
Yeah.
Like, wanting the well-being for our humanity is sane.
Yeah, absolutely. Instead of saying and there's a big part of civilization that believes that humanity is not good, right? That humanity is a cancer on the earth and needs to be reduced and eliminated, and that it's moral to not have children
Wait.
reproduce. That's a suicide cult, right? And there's something wrong. There's something insane about that. But why does that feel sane to people? What leads them to the conclusion that that's right? And that's, every one of these other systems is broken. The food system is making them unhealthy and the planet unhealthy, right? The healthcare system is making them miserable rather than joyful, right? So they have mental health issues, but it's mental ill health that everybody's suffering from, and so on across all these things, because they're all poorly designed. They've all been, the psychopaths in our civilization have figured out how to corrupt every one of these things, and the financial incentives reward them for further corrupting every one of these systems. Bitcoin steps back and breaks that connection, right? It's an incorruptible money that you can't game the system. You can't ask somebody to print more for you because you've been a bigger victim or this or that or the other. So it's only open to people's individual rational choices. And so then you can start building rational systems on top of it. And it serves as kind of like a guidepost, as a hallmark, as a template for a well-engineered incorruptible system. And I think that inspires this incoming age of Bitcoin savvy people to say, well, how do I build something that is permissionless and with integrity and indestructible and freedom loving, right? Rather than something that is mandated on everybody and not particularly good for anybody at all, but a compromise for everybody, but it does really well for somebody who's in power. Like, it's the end. Bitcoin signals the end of that era, and it came not a day too soon. and
The end of the world.
and just in time for us to work our way through this. And I think that's what this generation, like all of us who are alive today, I don't mean to single out like Gen X versus Gen Z or something, like all of us who are alive today, that's the task that we have, right? We have a very broken civilization that still has so many functioning aspects of it, but if we don't direct them in the right direction, they're all going to become self-destructive rather than creative. And so that's the task that we have right now. And it's a task of sanity, as you point out, bringing back sanity and understanding it much more fully in terms of what it means to be productive, what it means to understand nature, what it means to work with nature rather than work against it. And when you find that you've got some philosophy that really seems like contrary to nature, like that we should all kill ourselves, well, check your premises. It seems like something's wrong about our premises. What is it? And it may go very deep. You may have to go back many, many layers before you get to this is the thing that's broken.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. Well, no, but it's true because even all of that, speaking to a little bit to incentives, which is then we actually get to build the world that we want to see by voting with how we spend our sound money.
Yes.
Because like you said, there's not that, oh, I'm a victim here, or I'll do what you say if you subsidize me doing this, that ends up not being for the well-being and abundance of all. So before you take off, I do have one more thing I want to ask you, which is, around this idea of Bitcoin being worthy of Bitcoin. And as we were talking about this sanity and the insanity, part of what I call fiat psychology is this idea that we are also broken. So that there's something wrong with us that I think contributes to insanity, because then people are often looking for what's broken in them or what's wrong with them. And I know sometimes when I say this, coming from like, I'm a regression hypnotist for many years, I do a lot of healing work. But what I learned from that is there's a lot of psychology that teaches people that something is wrong with them, or keeps them stuck on a diagnosis, or keeps them thinking that there's so much work to do in themselves before they're worthy of love or worthy of Bitcoin. So what would you say to that?
Well, I'm not a psychologist, so I can't tell people exactly what that is. But I know in my heart of hearts that every person is a wonderful, special individual, right? And that it's a wonderful, special world that we're born into. And if you're having trouble loving yourself, it's not because you're fundamentally broken and evil entity. It is because you've got some mistaken view about yourself that's maybe causing you to do things that make you hate yourself, but nobody's forcing you to do the things that make you hate yourself. So if you're able to look within and see what actions would make you love yourself, ask yourself why you can't do those things. And the truth is, you can do those things. They may take courage. You may be afraid to do those things, but there's nothing better than actually being yourself and discovering yourself and living your true life, your own full self. And I think that this is what, if you're asking me to bring this back into Bitcoin, I think Bitcoin is a mirror image of that kind of life. Like Bitcoin is itself and nothing else. It doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. And it doesn't conceal anything about itself, right? It's fully transparent. The code is open source. You can audit every aspect of it. It stands before you naked and says, look at me, judge me for what I am. If you judge me to be good, use me. If you don't. It doesn't force itself upon anybody else. And when you look at that and you use that as a model, you can say, well, I can be the same. I can be who I am. Let people see who I am. People who don't like it don't have to deal with me. And people who do. And so you can form genuine relationships, genuine friendships with people who are like-minded. Not everybody in the world has to like you. You don't have to like everybody else. You're not here to please everybody else. You can't please everybody else. You just need to be yourself and find a way to be happy being yourself. So I think we're all ultimately worthy. And I'm not sure why, because I've never practiced psychiatry or psychology, why so many people might feel the way that you describe them feeling. But it's certainly not, every one of us is the story of the ugly duck. We're not ugly ducks. We're beautiful swans. And and you just have to come to the realization that that's what you are, and that others who are calling you ugly for things that aren't genuinely ugly, they're the ones with the problem, not you. And you need to not listen to what they have to say.
Yes. That's how I got to Bitcoin in terms of really understanding it and being so awakened to its spiritual consciousness, healing, moral, ethical,
Yeah.
um, you know, grounding was just by being myself and letting everything in my life fall away that wasn't.
There's a moment that happens, right? And it doesn't happen early in the process, but there's a moment that happens when you go deep down this Bitcoin rabbit hole where you see yourself and you are yourself and you surrender into being yourself. And it's terrifying and liberating at the same time. Because you've behaved in a certain way that's held yourself back because you weren't confident of being yourself in this world that wants you to be something else other than yourself. And then you let go and you're yourself, whether it's for a minute or a day or forever, and you realize the splendor of being your true self. And it's terrifying and liberating at the same time. But once you've experienced it, deep down inside that that's what you want to go back to. And I'll be honest, I think I've seen a few people get terrified by it enough that they were afraid to reapproach it again. But I've seen a lot of people find release in it and find a level of freedom that is a freedom that money can't buy, right? It's not, we don't exist to buy a super yacht. We exist to be ourselves, and we each have our own potential. And once you let go of, well, I have to do this job for this other person in order to make money to be able to buy this food that I don't particularly like, that, like if you're caught in this miserable life loop, and then you're yourself and you experience what it's like to be you, right? Like you're a butterfly walking around, and then suddenly you flap your wings and fly. You realize, oh, this is what I meant to do. When you actually manage to do that, it's an extraordinary experience. But some of us aren't quite ready for it yet because we've lived so long walking around on the ground and not spreading our wings and flying, to stick with that butterfly metaphor. So it's I think in this world, we need to encourage other people to be themselves when you see them being themselves, and not drive them down and say, you need to be like everybody else. You need to conform to the norm. You need to do this, that, the other. We saw a lot of that, of course, when COVID was around. It's like, you need to wear the mask. You need to take the injection. You need to distance yourself. You need to stay at home. You need
You need to go against yourself in a sense. I really do think that we are leaving the world of outer authority and coming into a new era of inner authority, trusting in your innate wisdom. And I think actually the reason why people kind of go there and then go back is because it is hard to look at the truths. Like once you start being yourself, things happen, good things can happen, but also there's a dark night of the soul a lot of times where then there is a time when we're seeing all the times we weren't ourselves and how much that hurt us, or even having to come out of burnout that so many people have, or other just pain, sadness, just grieving, this world that we lived in where we felt like we had to be something other than ourselves, and just being someone that's helped so many people through dark nights of the soul. I think that's where we can have a lot of compassion for people. Like, okay, so they're trying to be themselves, and so far they lost a bunch of friends, or that's how they feel. We know it's not really true, but there's a lot of loss that comes originally with shifting into
Yeah.
the glory.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we can have a lot of compassion.
Yeah, when you step away from conformity, where there's lots of people and lots of a sense of safety, into individuality, where there's maybe just you and you alone, that's potentially the terrifying moment. And so I think that there's a tendency to want to go back to conformity. And it's not that the conformity is bad, right? It's like, to the extent that it prevents you from being yourself and leaves you wanting the thing that you're truly passionate about, it's bad. It's not to say that everyone who conforms is a bad person or only wants bad things for you, but but there are illnesses about the conformed world that wants you to conform because they're conforming, right? And to fit in. And what you need to be doing is encouraging them to be individuals by showing them that you're comfortable being an individual and that they don't need to be the same individual as you. They just need to be the individual that they are, right? And that's what's really neat. I think when you get together in like the Bitcoin community, you see all these wild and crazy characters, right? Like you don't see everyone's cut from the same cloth. Everyone, like there's a cookie cutter and we're all the same. It's like everyone's unique and everyone's got their own thing, and you may not like some of them, and that's totally fine. You don't have to associate with them, but you may like some of them way more than all these people who are, did you catch the game last night, right? There's that meme of everyone who's asleep who says, oh, that's crazy. Did you catch the game last night? Right? There's more to be interested about than what happened in the game last night.
Yeah. We just had a local SAT market yesterday. So it's like all the Bitcoiners, exchanging, and people, the public coming to purchase their wares in Bitcoin and, seeing all of the different people and seeing how happy people are to just interact and connect and learn more about each other.
Yeah.
Shows it is a clear example of just one way that Bitcoin can create a better world.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having this conversation with me.
Like,
And do you want to tell people where they can find you and such?
The place where I'm most active is x.com. So at Tomer Strolight.
Yeah.
Is my x.com handle. I tweet there a lot. If you want to see some of my movies or read some of my articles, the two big movies that I put out, they're both short. One's 15 minutes called Bitcoin is Generational Wealth. So you can Google Bitcoin is Generational Wealth on YouTube, or The Legendary Treasure of Satoshi Nakamoto, which is a bit longer. It's about a 38-minute film, which talks about the spiritual awakening and self-discovery that Bitcoin takes people through the story of Bitcoin's creation and launch into the world. So it's a fun philosophical piece that people who haven't studied Bitcoin at all find quite interesting. So I recommend that. There's my book, Why Bitcoin, which you can get a free copy of downloaded at swan.com/whybitcoin, or you can buy the copy you have, or there's on my Twitter profile, there's a link to a full color photo book version of it. And tomerstrolight.medium.com is where I published many of my articles, like the one we talked about, Rich or Poor Bitcoiners Have What Money Can't Buy. And there's plenty of others over there. And that's probably enough for now. There's lots of other stuff I published. You can Google my name and find various essays of mine to the topics that we've discussed. That I think if you do any of those three things, let alone all three of them, you'll find there's quite a banquet of information.
There is. Those are the things I did. And I read a lot on medium.com, which I found really fascinating. And it's always great to hear you in spaces on X. So I really look forward to interacting more with you in that space. And thanks again so much for coming on UnHypnotized.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching. Remember to hit the subscribe and turn on the notifications so that you'll know right away when we have a new episode with another great guest. And if this episode got you wanting to buy Bitcoin, reach out to me. I'm an agent with Bitcoin Well, and I have a link down below to book a time in my calendar. And simply just book a call with me and we can get you started buying Bitcoin. And don't worry, no pressure. Let's have a conversation and see how Bitcoin can improve your life. Ciao for now.